like I said, y'all are a much bigger garden club than I'm used to dealing with, usually 20 or 30 people. And I was wondering as I was driving over here why it's at the Grapevine Convention Center, because that's a really big place for 20 people to hang out. now I see what it is. We just defaulted to this thing. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about tree identification. I love tree ID. I love anything tree, but especially tree identification. It's kind of like, I think that's why I got into forestry to begin with long ago. Is I just loved looking at trees. I want to know what the names of the things were. I know that's nerdy, and I know it's probably not practical a lot of times, but sometimes it is. And you cannot sit here and listen to somebody talk about tree ID for 45 minutes and identify any trees, hardly, maybe one or two. That's not the way to do it. So if you really want to know your trees, I teach a class every fall semester at Tarrant County College on tree identification. And it's more than just tree ID. I mean, you get a new tree, it's like, oh, okay, this is a live oak, blah, blah, blah. And I tell them a bunch of facts about live oak or whatever the tree is. So it's really fun. Almost every class is just hiking through the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens looking at trees. And you get college credit for something that simple. I love it. It's the easiest class in the world to teach. Now, the drawback for most people is you got to learn those Latin names too. And you got to learn how to spell them. So each class, I'm giving students new trees that they haven't had before, and at the same time, I'm quizzing them. There's a quiz every class, because it's just repetition. That's how you learn this stuff. And so every class, they're being quizzed on previous trees they've had, and they got to ID the thing. If they get it right, that's 4 points out of 10 possible. But then they got to spell those Latin names right. But if you misspell the Latin name, you only get counted off 1 point. So you can still get 9 out of 10 for the tree if the spelling's close to where I can recognize it. Sometimes it's so bad, I'm realizing it's not just misspelled, they have no idea what the Latin name is. So if you really want to learn tree ID, you can take that class. So that said, I'm going to sit here in 45 minutes I'm not going to teach you like, oh, this is a white ash or whatever. It's just the principles. There is a certification test. That's what this is based on, the ISA Certified Arborist exam. In Texas, there is no official licensing or certification for being an arborist. Anybody can call themselves an arborist and go out and sell to people whatever they want to sell to them concerning trees. There's no regulation there. My mother could go out and talk trees to people and sell her opinion about trees, and she don't know squat about trees. So the International Society of Arboriculture, that's what ISA stands for, came up with a certification program where you get a few years of experience, you pass this 200-question test, you keep getting continuing education credits year after year, and you will be certified. So if ever you're recommending, you're trying to help someone find a tree company to come out and do work on their trees, there's a website you can go to. It's called treesaregood.org, and there you can get a list of all the certified arborists. They've passed the test. They know what they're doing. Now, that said, there are still certified arborists who are crooks, and they will sell anything they can. So they have the knowledge, at least you know that. And usually most of them on there are pretty ethical. But anyway, that's the point of this PowerPoint was developed, because part of that exam is tree identification. You got to be able to identify the tree. And they used to on the test, there's different regional chapters for ISA. And Texas, of course, is its own chapter. And so they would send like 20 pictures of trees in Texas that the international folks would before you'd give an exam, and you just spread them out on a table. At some point during the exam, everybody would come up and look at the tree and identify it. Well, that is a problem in Texas, because what grows in Beaumont does not grow in El Paso, generally. And what's in Amarillo ain't in Brownsville. And so they'd send pictures that people, if they came, for instance, from El Paso, and they're sending all these pictures of East Texas trees, that they don't know half of them. And a whole bunch of them were out of focus, too. I never understood that. So they no longer make you actually look at pictures on the exam. It's just kind of the principles of identification. What are we looking for? What are we looking at? So that's a long-winded way to tell you that's what this PowerPoint's about. It's not pictures of individual trees, except at the end. that we're going to be looking at identification. So why does it matter? I know y'all are a long ways off from that picture. Does anybody recognize that ivy that wonderful family is posing with? Yeah? Poison ivy. So this is not a fake picture. This is real. And look at how fair-skinned that boy is. And he's holding one of the poison ivy leaves there. Yeah, I'm sure they would have liked to have been able to identify plants, specifically this vine, before taking this picture. So that's an extreme example, of course, but we do in our business, our hobby, whatever you want to call it, do need to be able to identify plants and trees. If you're applying pesticides, if you have a Texas Department of Agriculture pesticide license, you cannot legally apply and sell anything if you can't identify the plant you're treating. That's the law. You have to be able to identify it. Now, you don't have to be able to spell the Latin name on the thing. Unfortunately, I'm kind of a nerd on that too. But you have to be able to identify the plant to legally apply a pesticide. So, and here's the other thing. If you can do tree identification here in Texas, you can do it almost anywhere because we have so much species diversity here. I had a forester friend several years ago move to Colorado and join their ISA chapter up there, and they were having a meeting on trying to think of trainings they could put on for the membership, the things to train them in. He said, well, we could do a tree identification workshop. And the people that were native there are like shaking their heads. He said, they laughed at him. He said, we got like 10 species of trees here, right? It wouldn't take 2 minutes to do that. Here, we got a lot. That tree ID class I teach, for instance, by the end of the semester, we'll have about 100 trees that you'll learn. Now, not all native. I mentioned we're at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, so there's a lot of stuff planted from all over the world there. But there's a lot of species diversity in Texas. And the other complicating factor is where we live here in the Metroplex is right on that dividing line of East Texas, West Texas, Eastern United States, Western United States. So we get it from all sides. And because we're on that kind of dividing line, we also get a lot of hybrids. When I first started teaching that tree ID class, I was adamant that we're going to figure out the difference between Shumard red oak and Texas red oak. Well, I'm pretty convinced now after 40-something years of doing this, most of them I'm looking at are hybrids of the two together. So you've got that. So if you can figure it all out here, you can go to any other state and figure it out there too. I mean, California, Florida, they're kind of weird too, like us, but a lot of species diversity. So plant classification, that is the taxonomy of plants. What are we looking at? Oh man, see, this is the other thing I didn't have to do in 2009. Put on these things. You've seen all this in junior high, or what they call middle school now. I think most of us, we called it junior high when we were there. Or maybe it was high school. How taxonomy breaks down your kingdoms, your phylum, your class, all this stuff. Down there at the bottom is where in the tree ID class where we start paying attention. Family, genus, and species, where you're down to the individual plant. Now, little warning, one of my hang-ups, family, genus, species, it really should be family, genus, specific epithet. I've just had a habit ever since college of saying species, that final name there, when really it should be specific epithet, and that and genus together are the species. Just so you don't get confused when I'm not using the right terminology. But that's really what we're looking at most of the time when we get down to individual plants. So then there's nomenclature. That's the naming of the plants. What names do we give them? And this is where it can get really confusing, especially with those Latin names. So why do we have the Latin names? Most of y'all probably know the common names are highly variable. What we generally call post oak around here, y'all got a lot of post oaks. You're in the cross timbers here in Grapevine. My favorite tree. I got two trees that are tied for my favorite tree, post oak and aspen trees, because my parents were teachers, and so summertimes we'd either drive to California or Colorado or Mexico City, and it was usually Colorado, and it wasn't 1,000 degrees, and those aspens, the leaves are, in the wind, that kind of thing. I love those things. Anyway, the naming of them. So we call post oak around here our native cross timbers tree. Where my dad used to live up in northeast Texas around Texarkana, they call it, that same tree, pin oak. If you go further northeast, like to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or into Pennsylvania, there's a completely different oak that is the true pin oak. So that's an example of the common names varying by where you are. There was a book written in the 60s by the U.S. Forest Service, Trees of North America or something like that, where the author was just listing all the trees in North America. And I don't have the numbers exactly right, but there's like 1,100 different species of trees in North America. And there were something like 3,500 names for this 1,000 trees in North America. Another example is, who's ever heard of a horseapple tree? Okay, it's also called Osage orange. It's also called Bodark, which is a French term. So back in the 1700s, this dude called Carl Linnaeus, he was a scientist, and he developed this thing called binomial nomenclature, bi for two, nomial names. And that's where the Latin came in. So what I call post oak here, you can see up there the genus and species, or genus and specific epithet, is actually Quercus stellata. Quercus tells me it's an oak. Stellata tells me which oak. It's a post oak. So why do you have to go and use Latin? Why can't we use something we understand? There's a couple reasons for this. One is he was a scientist back in the 1700s, and research papers back then, for the most part, were written in Latin for whatever crazy reason. And so he's kind of proud of that. You know, they're kind of a little cocky out there. I'm a scientist. I write in Latin. It'll be Latin. The other reason is people that study Latin will argue this with me, but we call it a dead language. I'm not the only one that say we. Because there's not new words coming out in Latin. Every time there's a new Webster's dictionary, English dictionary comes out, there's new words in it. That doesn't happen in Latin, so it's stable. So that's why they chose Latin. You also have to write it a certain way. This is where it really gets goofy. All right, you see it's two words, the genus, specific epithet, together that's species. These two words have to be either italicized or underlined separately. You can't underline the whole two words together. If you do that on my quiz, it's wrong. And I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. I just enforce them. Also, the genus is always capitalized. The specific epithet never capitalized. So it's got to be written a certain way. So that's why we have Latin. And then sometimes we go beyond genus and species and get into varieties and cultivars for the tree ID class, but not usually. Things like a little gem magnolia, for example, that's a cultivar of southern magnolia. The other annoying thing about Latin, I'll stop talking about Latin in a minute, is that the names keep changing now. I spent a lot of years, a lot of money in college memorizing Latin names of trees. And I went through the list of trees in Texas a couple of years ago, and about 10% at that time, I'm sure there's more now, at that time about 10% of the trees had their Latin names changed. The whole maple family doesn't exist anymore. It's now moved in with soapberry. So it's hard enough learning how to spell these things and remember, but then they keep changing on you. And it used to be you couldn't change the Latin name. Somebody done research that discovered, somebody actually first identified this plant before the person that named it did. So then you could change the name. Well, now they're changing a lot of them due to DNA sampling. So somehow maples have some DNA resemblance to soapberries, which I don't know what that could possibly be. They don't look anything alike. These things were all originally classified based on sexual reproductive parts, the flowers and the fruits. Maple fruit has no similarity to soapberry fruit. So keep that in mind. If you're going to go learn all these Latin names, you might have to relearn them. And then finally, there's morphology. That's the appearance of the parts of the tree. That's where we finally get into the tree ID. And there's a lot of different things to look at on there. Branching structure is something pretty cool. Now, I got pictures of all this a little bit. It's not just words. Every deciduous tree, I'm not talking pine trees, every tree with leaves on it that usually fall out, has one of these three types of branching structure: alternate, opposite, or whorled. And again, pictures coming up on that. The alternate is extremely common. If you walk up to a tree and it's got alternate branching, That is not going to help you identify which tree it is. Opposite and whorl, though, are much more limited. And so if you walk up to a tree and it's got opposite branching or whorl branching, there's just a handful of things it can be. And so you can look those up pretty quick. Leaf type, simple or compound. Margins. We actually look at the edges of leaves sometimes to help identify it. Things in the elm family have what's called an oblique base to the leaf. It's not symmetrical. One side's bigger than the other. It tells you it's in the elm family. And then all this stuff here, I never, until I had to take this class in college a million years ago, knew you could identify anything by looking at these little details here. The bud type, the way the buds look and how they're arranged on the twig. The pith is the center of a twig. If you're trying to identify a pecan versus walnut, for instance, their leaves look very similar. If you don't have the fruit there, you might not be able to tell them apart. You can cut open a twig and they're dramatically different. You can separate pecan from walnut by looking at the inside of a twig or the pith. Seed types, I said they were all originally separated by sexual reproductive parts. The flowers become the seed. So if you got seed, you've got the sexual reproductive parts. Okay, I say acorn, sorry, and so I know it's acorn. I was born in Beaumont. I only lived there 6 months, but somehow it hung on. It's acorn. And so if you got an acorn, you can tell, you know it's an oak tree of some sort. You might not know which oak. Which, going back to the Shumard versus Texas red oak question, that's how you tell them apart. You can't really look at the leaves. Bark, you can identify a lot of trees by bark. By the end of the semester, I'll have my students walk up to certain trees and I say, do not look up. I don't want you looking at those leaves. Look straight ahead at that bark. This is a test tree because you can identify by bark. Form, flowers, again, is how they're originally done. So all that stuff you can look at. There's some horrible pictures in here that I took, and then there's the ones that are good that I stole off the internet. This PowerPoint was made before iPhones. I made this, I don't know, when did iPhones come out? 15 years ago. So I didn't have something on my phone to just take a picture of a tree and it tells me what it is. As a matter of fact, if my students don't know about iNaturalist and things like that, I don't tell them till the end of the semester because they don't need me if they got iNaturalist. So this is how we used to identify the things. You'd have a key of some sort, and there's all kind of different keys. What I used in college was this thing that you can't see. It's called a dichotomous key, and it asks you a series, it asks you two questions step by step. Does a tree look like this, or does it look like that? Oh, it looks like that. Okay, go to number 4. Does the leaf look like this, or does it look like that? Oh, it looks like this. Okay, go to number, and you keep going until you hit a dead end and then a tree now. That's a dichotomous key, and they're kind of hard to use if you're not used to them, but that's the way I learned, and so those are very useful. Most of your reference guide or older textbooks reference guides have a dichotomous key in there you can use to identify your plants. There's a lot of different ones now. So I mentioned if you can do tree ID here in this part of the world, you can do it almost anywhere. It's real important if you have a guide, a book, again, it's on your phone now probably, to have a regional guide, something specific to where we live. An example, the Audubon Society, they've got tree ID books. They have an Eastern U.S. and a Western U.S. Again, we're on that dividing line, so you got to buy both books. And it's nationwide, so there are some trees in Texas that are endemic are not real common that are in Texas that they don't even have in their guide. So it's better to find some kind of guide that's to your region here. And these are just some examples. This one right here, I love this thing, but it's like this thick. You're not going to be taking that out in the field with you. And it's every woody plant from Arizona to Mississippi. So it includes poison ivy. It's not just trees and things like that. They got smart and then went and pulled all the trees out of this and all the trees just in this part of the state and made a separate book there, Trees of North Texas. I love that. But there's all kinds of different reference guides out there. The point being, if you're going to buy one that's specific to this area. All right, so finally, the whole point of the talk, I guess I better look at my clock. Yep, I need to hurry. All right, so we're usually looking at four main things: fruit, flower, twigs, and leaves. So we'll look at each one of these individually and see what's what with these things. By the way, the leaves, that's what we're most familiar with. That is probably, of these four things, that is the worst thing to use to identify a tree. Because of this idea called variability, where you'll be looking at a leaf on a tree, and you kind of think you know what it is. And then you go look in your field guide, and there isn't a picture in there that looks like the leaf you're looking at. That's variability. So you kind of got to look at the whole pattern, more than one leaf. Not all species do that, but some, like post oak. Post oak, man, they'll throw stuff all over the place. So flowers, we'll start with the flowers. Sometimes that's easy. There's a lot of plants we identify by just knowing what the flower looks like flowering dogwood there. I went to the Dogwood Festival in Palestine a month or so ago. There's like 2 dogwoods in that town. They got a dogwood festival. If you've ever been to East Texas in the spring, though, you probably recognize flowering dogwood, red buds. This is not a talk about recommended trees, by the way. It's just tree ID. The Bradford calorie pears, hibiscus, we can identify a lot of things by just looking at the flower. But it's not always that easy. These, for example, are called catkins, and they're on pecans, they're on oak trees, and each catkin looks like a worm or a caterpillar. It's got dozens of teeny tiny flowers on it. And you could hand me a catkin in the spring. I'm not going to be able to tell you what tree that is. I mean, I can tell you, well, it's probably a pecan or an oak, but there's lots of oaks. There are more oaks in Texas than any other state. There are more species of oaks in America than any other country. We got a lot of oaks, so it's not always easy. And then this thing was over in a park in Dallas. On the back side is another branch that has even a third color to it. Somebody went in and grafted a bunch of peach varieties onto this peach tree there. So I can tell you it's a peach. I can't tell you which one. It's a little example. So sometimes the flowers can be very difficult. And they're also not usually there very long. Something like a crepe myrtle that's blooming most of the summer, that's the exception to the rule. Usually when something's flowering, it comes and goes. So move on to the fruit and seed. Well, that's a great way to identify them too, because that's what the flowers become, is the fruit and the seed. And just like the flowers, sometimes it's easy, sometimes not. Acorns, you know it's an oak, mesquite. It's a pine cone. I don't know which pine tree that is, but it's a pine tree. And pretty easy to look up what pine trees grow around here. Not a lot. Ash and an apple of some sort. Oh, by the way, have y'all heard of emerald ash borer? We're not going to have any ash trees. They're taking them all out. And do you know there's over 90 species of insects or animals that depend on ash trees for some point in their life cycle? I never knew that until it became this issue. Yeah, side story, nothing to do with tree ID. So anyway, fruit and seed. That's a real good way. So it can be very diagnostic. A lot of times the fruit's there longer than the flowers, not always. But there's a couple of things to watch out for. And this picture is hard to see, I know. This is at the Dallas Arboretum. There is these things called dioecious and monoecious species. Monoecious trees have male and female parts on every tree. Wait a minute, I got that right? Yeah. Dioecious trees have separate male and female trees. So these are 2 red cedar in the Dallas Arboretum. This one's kind of got this blue-green look to it, and this one doesn't. This is a male with no seed on it, and this is a female with seed on it. So if you're sitting there waiting to see seed on the tree to help identify it, and it's a male, you're never going to see seed on the thing. Also, sexual maturity. Most trees don't start mating as soon as they sprout. It'll be several years later. So some challenges with seed, too. Onto the buds and twigs, and by this I mean trunk, bark, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, I never knew you could identify trees by this stuff. But if you look up close at that first picture, you can see, doggone it, those twigs do look a lot different than each other. That one on the left is a walnut. The one on the right is some kind of oak. The one on the left is gray with little dots on it called lenticels. The one on the right doesn't have that. The bud scales that are covering the buds are totally different. The one on the left is fuzzy and soft. The one on the right is brown and hard. And then another thing that can help identify these things right here, that's called a leaf scar. That's where the leaf fell off the tree. And it leaves a little scar there. You can identify some species by that leaf scar. when you get to trying to separate the green ash from the white ash, which is also called American ash, you could, if you have seed, you might be able to tell the difference. They're very similar. Everything else looks the same. But you look at the leaf scar, and that's how you tell them apart, some tiny little thing like that. Now, you could cut the tree down and look at the rings and the pores in there and identify it that way. I never knew that. I had to take a class in college where they give you a chunk of wood, and you got to say what species of tree it is. I don't remember any of it. I couldn't do it now, save my life, but you could do that if you wanted to. And then they make ID books just on twigs, right? I had to have a twig collection for a class. And this is a bad picture, but I think the next picture is better. But this is a walnut, this is a pecan, center of the twig, and this is what's called chambered. Let's see, next bit, yeah. This is walnut. And this is not pecan, but that's what pecan looks like. So despite them looking so similar in so many ways, if you cut open a twig, you can separate the two that way. So there's all these different bud types. It's not like you got to learn that stuff. I don't know them. If I'm looking at an ID guide and it says, okay, it's got a superposed bud, I have no idea what that is. I'll look it up. That's fine. You don't have to memorize this stuff. But the point is, there's a million different things to look at to help identify these. Okay, I talked about stem arrangement earlier, alternate, opposite, and whorled. These are twigs where I cut the leaf blade off and just left the little stem of the leaf or petiole attached to show the three different branching structures. And the first one is opposite. The leaves come out opposite each other. Then there's alternate here, back and forth. It alternates back and forth. And then there's whorled, where you have 3 or more leaves coming out from the same vertical point. That middle one, alternate, extremely common, doesn't help you at all. But the other 2 are not common at all. The whorled, the only tree I know that's got a whorled stem arrangement, leaf arrangement, is catalpa. And then you get over here to opposite. Let's see, what's this new thing? Yeah. Opposite, okay, there's an acronym to help you remember which trees are opposite branch. MAD buck, and it's not perfect, but MAD stands for maples, ashes, dogwoods, and then buck stands for buckeye. So if you're out at the Fort Worth Nature Center, anybody ever been to the Fort Worth Nature Center? That place is awesome, man. So let's think about this. Mad buck. Yeah, I walk up to a tree at the Fort Worth Nature Center. It's native. I know it's not planted out there, that's why I'm pointing them out. Mad, maple. We have one native maple, and we love maples because of fall color, right? You know what our one native maple's fall color is? This. We got one, and it's this. So we got one maple. Ashes. We got white ash, we got green ash, we got Texas ash. We're not going to have those for much longer. Dogwood, we've got one, and I'm talking Metroplex, not Texas. We've got one native dogwood, and it's a bush, but we'll make it feel happy and call it a tree. We're up to 5. And then buck is for buckeye, and that's the same. It's a small, very small tree or bush, but let's call that a tree. So you're only got like 6 possibilities. Now there is one other, viburnum, rusty black haw viburnum. So there's 7 trees with opposite branching natives. So if you walk up there and it's opposite, it's pretty easy to look up those 7 trees and say, oh, it's this one or it's not that one. So that's branching structure. The other thing, too, to remember about that is you got to look at the new growth, the branch tips. You can't look back at the main trunk that's 40 years old and see this arrangement anymore because, twigs, branches break off all the time. So you got to look at that new growth. But Mad Buck will help you. Now, if you go to the botanic gardens, where they plant trees from all over the world, it's going to be more than 6 or 7 possibilities. Opposite, but the same thing still applies. The maples from Asia are opposite branch. The ashes from Russia, they're opposite branch. So you'll have more possibilities, but it's still the maples, ashes, dogwoods, buckeyes. So finally, the leaves. As I mentioned, it's the worst thing to use sometimes to identify trees. And that first picture is a good example of why. Those are from the same tree, okay? The only similarity they have is they're green. If you look up in any field guide, well, not any, most field guides, this species, and look at the picture or the drawing of the leaf to help identify it, it doesn't look like either one of these usually. That's variability. This is a live oak, and live oaks will do that. Post oaks will do that. They'll have a lot of different shaped leaves on the tree. But I mean, this looks like a holly or something with these points. Some species, like that Bradford pear thing, they do have very consistent leaves. So it just depends. And then sometimes it's like, what is a leaf? This tree is kind of cool. It's called a dragon blood tree. I think it grows in Madagascar. It's called dragon blood because if you scar it, the sap that comes out is red like blood, and it looks like it's bleeding. And then different types of leaves. So leaf parts, you've got the blade, you've got the petiole. That's one leaf. Now, there are simple leaves, and there are compound leaves, and there are pine needles, and there's cactus spines. They're all leaves. A simple leaf, that first one on the left, that bur oak, is a simple leaf. It's one leaf blade. That thing in the middle, that whole thing is one leaf. It's called a compound leaf, so it has several leaflets on it. So how do you know this whole thing is a leaf instead of each one of these is the leaf? You look for the bud. And I take bad pictures, as I've already explained, so I don't have the attachment, the end of the leaf on here. There's a bud on the twig down at the base of this leaf. There's also a bud on the twig at the base of this leaf. There are no buds at the base of these leaflets. So you're looking for a bud, you're looking for a bud, no bud, no bud. You finally get down here is a bud that tells you that whole thing is a leaf. So that's a compound leaf. And there are different types of compound leaves, forestry. There's like 3 or 4 different words for every one thing out here. So you can call it pinnate. Once compound's probably a lot easier, and most people understand. And then there's twice compound or bipinnate, like a mimosa. And again, you're not finding any buds at the base of any of these leaves until you get down here and there's a bud. So that whole thing is one leaf. And there are some trees like Kentucky coffee tree, tree of heaven, where this one compound leaf, they're like this long. They can be huge. Oh, and part of that tree ID class, your semester project, at the end of the semester, you got to turn in a leaf collection. And these are leaves mounted on 8.5 by 11 paper, put in a binder, correctly identified, right? And so it's like, there's a 2-foot long leaf. How are they going to mount that in there? And I tell them, just take little pieces, but put some note in there that tells me, you know, that's not the whole leaf. I had one kid once, I'm flipping through all these things, grading them. I get somewhere in the middle, and his leaf, I'm looking at it, looks really familiar, and it's like, oh, wow, that's pot. He mounted marijuana. Yeah, he mounted marijuana, and I'm like, do I turn him in, or do I give him an A? I don't know what to do. I gave him 100, and then I returned his collection without that leaf in it. And then there's palmately compound. That's like the palm of a hand. And some Japanese maple leaves will look a lot like this. They're simple, though, because they're all connected at the base. These are all separate. That's why it's a compound leaf. Pictures. There we go. Once pinnate, twice pinnate, and then that is not pot. That is vitex, that compound leaf there. I mentioned we even look at the bases and the tips of the leaves sometimes. Now, after you've been doing it a long time, you don't really do. When you're starting out, those are things that help you identify it too. And I said the elms have this oblique base. Now that's extreme, that drawing there. But you can identify something in the elm family by that oblique base on there. The margins, even look at the margins. There's entire, there's serrated, lots of different things. This is an entire margin. It's just smooth. This is doubly serrated. And here's a red oak that's lobed. These are called lobes, and these are sinuses. And there's an elm, and you can partially see that oblique base on there. So lots of variability in leaf shapes. And then finally, there are some other things you can look at there. Oh, doing good. Form, habitat, where it's growing, and bark, like I mentioned. Bark's pretty cool. It's a nice parlor trick to be able to sit there and name a tree just looking at its bark. You know, most people look at you like, who cares? And it's like, no, that's cool. Form, though, those trees on the left, those are bald cypress. Since we're all plant nerds in here, most of us probably recognize that by the form or the shape of it. Its first couple of 100 years, it looks like that. Anybody in here a landscape architect? Oh, I can speak. No, landscape architects are so much better than me on design. but a lot of them have this issue with planting things by shape, color, whatever, and not thinking about the fact it's a living organism and it's going to grow. So these trees, this is downtown Dallas over there. It's a bank, I think. Got all the glass, and that overhang is glass. And so they planted these bald cypress in there because they're pretty. Well, they grow. Now they're hitting the top of this glass there, and they got to be removed. Well, between the time they were planted and they had to be removed, the city of Dallas enacted a tree preservation ordinance. So besides the expense of removing those, they had to pay thousands of dollars in fines for something that never should have been planted there to begin with. Anyway, the point is, it looks like a Christmas tree, so you can say, bald cypress. We don't have a lot of trees around here with that shape. The other thing about bald cypress, that is that's our longest lived tree in Texas. They'll live longer than anything else. But they don't stay that shape. You know, they get up 1,000 years old. There's nothing in Texas that hardly does that. And their shape is completely different than that. I mean, you've all seen them down in the hill country or maybe southeast Texas. Habitat, where it's growing. Have you ever been driving like down maybe towards Glen Rose or out towards Weatherford? You get to some prairie areas that's not cross timbers or a lot of trees, and you'll see a straight line of trees going across a pasture or something like that. That tells me there either is or was a fence there. And birds have sat on that fence and pooped out seed from usually a sugar hackberry. By the way, this is another thing. If you take that class, I'm going to hammer you over the head on what a hackberry is. What everybody calls hackberry around here is really sugarberry. Now, it is one of the hackberries, but it's not the hackberry that everybody's talking about. So anyway, if it's a straight line, it's probably sugar hackberry or Hercules club, because the birds, like I said, they eat those seeds, they sit on it, and they poop it out, and you get a straight line out there. Next time you're driving through the prairie pasture areas, look for straight lines of trees. It's kind of, nature does not do straight lines. Like the only place I know nature really does straight lines is crystals, like ice crystals, mineral crystals, things like that. I had the city of Dallas, several years ago, they had some live oaks next to SMU going down Hillcrest Boulevard that all the live oaks hanging over the street had browned out. But the other side of the live oak that was growing over the grass area was still green. And so I had a straight line of brown on both sides of the street for half these trees, and they thought it was a disease. I'm like, I don't know what it is, but it's not a disease. Something was done here, man-made. And come to find out later, they admitted they had resurfaced that street a month or so ago with asphalt. They have those trucks or whatever with the hot asphalt in it, slowly moving down the street, and it toasted all the trees. But it was a straight line, so it wasn't a disease. And then bark, I mentioned bark. I don't know if you can see that good. These are thorns, these big thorns, like this long. That's a honey locust. And so you can identify, thank you. You can identify a lot of times by bark. Funny story on these honey locust trees. We've got an office in Lubbock. Yeah, if you've ever been to Lubbock, you're probably wondering why. Get your guns up. I did end up loving Lubbock. It took a while. But one of the great things about it is Santa Fe and New Mexico is right next door. And it's not humid. Anyway, they've got like one little picnic area out there in the Panhandle for every 1,000 miles or so. And it's got one table. There are no native trees on the high plains. Everything there has been planted or naturalized. But anyway, so you go to this picnic area. They got one picnic table. The TxDOT has planted one or two trees, and they're this thing. And kids at the time, well, they're still stupid, but they were really dumb then, and they'd get out of the car and immediately run and start playing, trying to climb this tree. It's like they don't even see these things, and they get nailed every time. I don't know why TxDOT would plant those, but hey, go look out there in the Panhandle. So anyway, you can identify bark. Lots of different bark. Anybody ever been to Big Bend or the Davis Mountains and seen alligator juniper? Love those trees. And I added this finally because, like I say, you don't really need me or anybody else teaching you tree ID. This thing is great. And it's not the only app out there. It's just what I'm used to, but it's free. I take pictures of mushrooms, take pictures of, this is how we first identified emerald ash borer in the Metroplex. A 12-year-old kid had iNaturalist. I never heard of it. He liked taking pictures of bugs, and he had this bright green beetle dead in his driveway he took a picture of, and some guy from Parks and Wildlife saw that and it's like, holy crap, we got emerald ash borer here. So that's a pretty cool app. There are others, I just don't know what they are. Okay, last thing here, just to point out some things. I said you can't look at a bunch of pictures of trees, identify them, and then I throw up pictures of trees. But this is to show the difference between, in the tiny details that it can separate a tree. The white ash here versus the green ash. Okay, so you can see the seed and the leaves are very similar. The bark, you can identify it by bark, got that diamond pattern. But look at this leaf scar here. And it's opposite branching. Remember, mad buck, maples, ashes, dog, buckweed. Even when the leaves are gone, you can still tell it's opposite branching because of the leaf scars. But here's the leaf scar. See how flat it is? And there's the buds sitting on top of it. That's green ash. White ash, the leaf scar is a U-shaped, and the bud sinks down in it. That tiny detail is how you can tell the white ash from the green ash. But like I said, they're all going to be dead in a few years. What does it matter? There's that oblique base for the elm. It looks like I tore off part of that leaf. No, that didn't. And then one more in here. I wanted to show Shumard versus Texas. Oh, okay, yeah, here we go. So, Shumard, and we have 2 live oaks too. The Shumard and Texas red oak can get very confusing because they hybridize. We have 2 live oaks in the state too, and good luck telling them apart. I went to the Botanical Research Institute many years ago. They've got a herbarium with plant samples from 150 years ago. We got both species of live oak leaves out and looked at them, and they all looked like they were just jumbled together. So finally, the botanist found some reference in a book, and she goes, okay, here it is. If the acorn looks like a suppository, then it's Texas live oak. I'm like, what makes you think I know what a suppository even looks like? So live oak and Shumard, this top half of the leaf here looks just like what a book will say Shumard looks like. This bottom half looks just like what a book will say Texas red oak looks like. And they're both on one leaf. They like I said, they hybridize a lot. So if I have a good acorn, I can tell them apart. That's Shumard. It's got that cap that looks like just this little thin beret. The Texas comes further down the acorn. So a lot of tiny details can separate the species. That was my point. Okay, so anybody got any questions? No? Oh, yeah?
The first thing you talked about, the arborists said if they say they're certified arborists, can I ask them to produce something that I know that they are certified?
Yeah, she asked about the certified arborist. If they say they're certified, can she ask them to produce something that proves it? Yeah, they should have credentials. They'll have a card from the International Society of Arboriculture. Now they can, if they're really dishonest, they can sit there, be, like I said, certified and still sell you something. I had one guy, he came to all our tree conferences. He knew stuff, tree stuff. And we've got this really good brochure that identifies oak wilt, which is our biggest tree disease problem in Texas. And he had a bag of symptomatic live oak leaves he kept in his truck, and he'd drive through like Highland Park, a high-dollar area, and he'd go up to somebody's door that had a live oak, and on his way to the door, he'd throw a few of these leaves out under the tree, and then he'd hand them our brochure saying, look at this, come over here, and he'd do it. That was before certification, but he would have been certified because he knew the right stuff. But go to that treesaregood.org website. You can check them out too. Yes, ma'am? Oh, and I don't hear good anymore, so. Yeah, it's a different species. Yeah, it's a different species. They say everything's bigger in Texas. That's a lie. It's not. Pretty sure they do. Yeah, but the leaves fall off in midsummer too, so it just sticks. It's a weird little plant. All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, Nancy's got my email address. If anybody ever has any questions, feel free to email me. I don't ever answer the phone. I do answer emails, though. Thank you.